Hello. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rich Robinson. I am the co-chair of the Thriving and Resilient Communities Funding Circle with the Threshold Foundation. And I'm here with Ben Roberts, a steward of the Thriving and Resilient Communities Collaboratory, and Jon Scott, the president and director of the Singing Field Foundation, and as well, he's on the national staff of Clean Water Action. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
And we're here to have a talk about democratic philanthropy, the Thriving and Resilient Communities Collaboratory. And Ben and Jon have each been involved in their own way. And I am happy to have you both here. Right now, I'd like to invite Ben. Could you please talk with Jon a little bit about Jon's involvement, introduce Jon and his involvement in TRCC.
Sure. Thanks for doing this, Rich. So what's become kind of the signature piece of work that the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory supports on an annual basis is this collaborative grant-making process we call the Co-Project Initiative, and we do it in partnership with the TRC Funding Circle at Threshold that you're a member of. And part of the vision of this, we're now in our fourth year of this collaborative grant-making work, and part of what we designed was a way to have the funding pool extend beyond what Threshold members contribute. So there's been an invitation for funders from outside of Threshold to pledge money to the pool, which is then allocated through a democratic council process. And the council knows that we have not only whatever money is coming from Threshold, that number is going to be decided, it's decided each year, I think in June, but whatever other commitments are coming in from outside funders. And Jon has been a contributor to that pool in all four of the cycles that we've done, and it's been really valuable and positive to be able to tell the story of how we've created this collaborative process in that dimension, as well as in the funding decision making. There's a fun story too about how we connected up that also relates to the funding circle that I could take a couple minutes to tell, but maybe I don't know if you want me to do that now or hold that off for a minute.
Well, let's see if there's time to squeeze in the story. I could just say, reason that I got involved first and foremost is because somebody asked me. Intrigued. That was just to participate in the collaboratory period. And then the reason that I decided to become a funding participant in the collaboratory, and that came later, is again because somebody asked me. An important lesson there. Whoever did the initial asking was smart about it because they knew there was sort of a pre-existing interest in the subject of grassroots grant making or democratic philanthropy. They knew of my role sort of on both sides of that divide between philanthropy and activism, or between the doing and the funding of the doing. And I was just intrigued about the idea of looking at these things from a new perspective, meeting some new people and learning some more. And partly from the perspective of learning some more from someone who's basically considers himself to be a professional activist. That's my full-time day job with Clean Water Action, at the moment doing fundraising and communications, but also from the point of view of someone involved in philanthropy in a way that might resonate with some of the other folks who are looking at this video. We're a small family foundation. We have no staff other than family volunteers, of which I'm the lead volunteer. And we want to feel like what we're spending our time and money on has value and is helping to build something. It goes beyond something that's just transactional. And we want to find a way to have a meaningful impact that might be bigger than the way a foundation might traditionally operate, just giving away 5% of its assets, just writing checks, basically. And so this was an opportunity to start thinking about that from a new perspective.
Thank you for introducing that you're on both sides your own activism and in philanthropy. And when you say a new perspective, I mean, for most people, philanthropy is writing checks, and that's the whole model. And there can be more involved. They can put out requests for proposals. There can be screening, and I'm not minimizing or dismissing that. That can be a lot of work. And yet, you're part of a family foundation, and you're looking for something extra, something more. And were you finding that with the TRCC?
Yeah, it was really good. Really interesting experience, because once I got involved in the process, what I sort of saw is a valiant and inspiring effort to create something new. And that's exciting to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
That was appealing because it was helping to break down the barriers which I think can tend to get in the way of effective social change philanthropy, which may or may not be the same as other kinds of philanthropy. And often in my experience on both sides of that divide between philanthropy and activism, I see sort of the traditional ways of doing business as much part of the problem as they have the potential to be part of the solution. And so this was a new way of coming at that, trying to break down that barrier, building a knowledge base of experience and relationships, and in turn helping, I think, to grow a movement in ways that are very exciting.
Do you recall or realize or remember that you actually had a part in our moving in that direction? That when we first connected, there was an interview process that you were part of that was actually not a TRCC project per se. It was funded by the Threshold Funding Circle, though, in partnership with the Post-Carbon Institute and the New Economy Coalition. And in your interview, you talked about some of these same ideas of shifting the power structures in philanthropy. And that was part of our inspiration for creating the co-project initiative. You seeded that thinking, or were one of a number of voices seeding that thinking, and we were paying attention to at the time. We brought it, Leslie, me in particular, brought it up with the Funding Circle, and they said, yeah, the idea that we should give up some of our decision-making authority to the people doing the work in the field actually resonates with us. Let's try that. And now here we are, in our fourth cycle of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it would come as a surprise for you all to hear that people that are in the activist community are always sort of puzzled by the black box of philanthropy, and many folks who have spent a lot of time asking for money secretly dream of being in a position to being able to give it away instead. Mm-hmm. A lot of the people involved professionally in philanthropy, I sense very often, especially again in the area of social change, are eager to have more of a hands-on role in the kinds of things they're funding. And there's a reason for that, really good reasons. And it just makes sense, I think, to sort of explore ways of knocking down that divide between the two and creating more in the way of partnership and relationship than sort of maintaining things the way they've always been.
So could you please expand on your involvement with the TRCC? You said you came in first as participating in the TRCC because somebody asked you, and then you ended up donating money through the Singing Field Foundation to the TRCC because somebody asked you. Can you please touch in on your experience? Please review your experience with TRCC for the viewers.
Sure. It's just back up a step. I had some previous experience with the concept of grassroots grant making or democratic grant making, where the affected communities have a say in the allocation of the philanthropic resource. Our foundation has funded Global Green Grants, which is a practitioner in the field for a long time, mostly international. And we've also funded the New England Grassroots Environmental Fund, which is a place-based philanthropy that practices grassroots grant making. And I'm now on the board of that organization, but previously I'd been on a grant making committee representing my activist background for that same organization. And so basically what my involvement let me do was learn more about the other side of the coin of activism from what I usually see, which is people in frontline communities fighting to stop something bad more often than not. And that's sort of the imperative that they feel as people who may not have self-selected to become activists, but spot something wrong in their community and want to do something about it and have the skills and personality and drive to want to take charge and bring others with them. That's what organizing is about, or at least one of the definitions of it would be. And the TRCC gave a way for me to support those kinds of activities. On, as I said, on the flip side of fighting the bad, most of the folks who are involved in that also have a positive vision for what they want for themselves, their families, and their communities. The TRCC has tended to focus on positive solutions being pursued by people who are simultaneously fighting bad things. And so I like to think of this whole process, the grant-making process, the relationship building process, the movement building. What are we building? I think what we're building is something beautiful for the future that's going to last. And because the scale that this happens at, which is a number of relatively smallish grants, we're getting in at the ground floor. We're helping to support and nurture new leaders and new organizations who are going to be critical for the future of the movements that we care about. And I'm getting a chance through my involvement initially, which was much more hands-on in the TRCC, to actually have great conversations with people I would never meet. Again, both on the philanthropic side and on the activism side, and to provide what for most foundations or individual donors might find like a small amount of resource to places where that small resource can make a big difference on its own. And when you pool it with others, it makes an even bigger difference. And then the last thing I would say is we're also building a new model for the business of philanthropy that directly challenges and solves for some of the bigger problems that divide the people that we are hoping to help and support from the people who have the money and power.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think you very articulately addressed the two messages that we're consistently trying to deliver. One is what we're funding, what kind of projects does TRC, Thriving Resilient Community Fund? And you're saying, yes, it's a lot of people with a vision of what the world can be, usually simultaneous to addressing something bad that they want to reduce or eliminate. And also the other message of how we're funding, and that's this process, this democratic process of bringing funders and activists together at the table to decide where the money goes. And I appreciate your saying the amounts of money that go out, while it's a significant amount of money, individual grants that spark something can often be not a large amount in the broader perspective of how much is needed and everything. I always think there's some magic in that, or a lot of magic in that, that for however, X $1,000, whether it's 3 or 5 or 12 or 30, something is launched that care goes much farther than what you think that money will do. Ben, it looked to me like you wanted to chime in with something.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on the relationship piece that John talked about. And that's often something that the way in which this work builds relationships is often sort of underappreciated, hard to measure, hard to even know what kinds of connections are created and are catalyzed. But you mentioned the New England Grassroots Environment Fund, and they've become active members of the TRCC community and have benefited from grant funding. And I think you were one of the people that introduced us and said we really should check out what these folks are doing. And now they've played a core role in a number of ways. And they introduced a framework that touches on this distinction between resisting the bad and reforming the existing system and recreating and reimagining new systems. That's become part of our regular vocabulary. And here we are talking about that again today, and the idea that all of those different aspects are important and essential. but often what gets the headlines, especially today, is the resistance work as opposed to the reimagining of fundamentally different ways to do things, which is what the focus of the TRC co-project funding is really about. And so back to the relationship piece for a second. So it's not only, through connecting with you, we learn about new organizations, but in the collaborative grant making process, one of the things you hear the most about from the organizational leaders that are making these decisions is how valuable it is to be making these decisions with one another, to see what kinds of grants their contemporaries, their peers are writing, and to learn about their work and just to build those connections. And I think in the end, that could be as valuable a service as the money in terms of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely within the exploration of, well, what makes a community thriving and resilient? How do you catalyze that? There's a few different bells that need to be rung. And one of them, and perhaps a key one, is the network. That in isolation, the community doesn't thrive, does not thrive. It's not resilient because there's no network, there's no fallback for individuals and organizations, and it's just so I don't think sufficiently understood and valued in our current culture.
Social fabric is a term I love for that.
Okay, good. That's good. John, you said as you were touching upon your recalling your involvement in TRCC, you said it was such an innovative idea, an exciting idea. Now you've been involved with it in varying degrees, but it's been a few years. What's your perspective about democratic philanthropy? Does it work? It was an exciting idea. That's great. How's it working? How's it going from your point of view?
Oh, a couple things. I think it's still a field that's being shaped, and I would think one of the things exciting for someone thinking about engaging is the opportunity to help shape it and learn at the same time. I would say it's definitely working by a couple of measures, and I'll just take my foundation as an example. It's allowed us to support and connect with individual leaders and organizations that would have never even come onto our radar. And so it's helping to move resources from my foundation to places where it can really make a difference. Not that we wouldn't have found other places to put the money, but that's a real plus. I think we are creating a model and a structure which can be replicated or brought to scale by the same people who are doing it now, or ideally perhaps both. And that's also very exciting. I also, just in terms of me and my personal approach to things, I will say, this is probably for the first time, Ben hasn't heard this before, I was a little bit of a reluctant participant. So I did it because someone asked me to. And the reason is because I have tended to have a bias in my own social change theory that fighting is very often the way to get what you want, and organizing to bring people together to fight together is a good way to do it. And I still believe that's very important. And I also felt, and it's probably even more so true today, at times like this, why do we want to be focused on driving resilient communities when we got a lot of fires to put out, when the resistance role is so important? And I think what I've learned through this process is they're all part of a spectrum. All the best leaders have both aspects, fight and build, fight and create. They're all together. And in fact, you're going to do the best creating if you have the knowledge from the fighting. And you're going to do the best fighting if you have a base of people who believe in your vision and values. So there's something worth fighting for together. So I think the model is working, but it's in its very early stages, and there's more involved than just the transfer of money from one place to another. There's a creation of relationships, weaving of a network, support and training for all the participants, both on the philanthropy side and the organizing side. It's still very exciting, and I would say, I would almost think about this, if anyone is already sort of oriented that way, it has some similarities with venture investing, except that you're investing in something that is where you're not getting a personal return. Our community, largely drawn, is getting a return, and that's just very fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. To me, that speaks to, I have a pet peeve that so many of these organizations are called not-for-profit organizations. And I just think that's such a not very good title. I think something more like social benefit organizations is something that would serve a lot better. So thank you for speaking to that people's money is going to something that's not designed to, it's not like a financial investment, like a bond or a stock. It's a different kind of thing that changes the world. And thank you for that. Well, before we wind up, I want to ask one more question to both of you, and then invite Ben to tell your story if you want to. I guess before we wind up, for the people who are reviewing, what do you want people to know about getting involved in the Thriving and Resilient Community Funding Circle and or the Thriving and Resilient Community Collaboratory?
I would say that it is as easy or as challenging as you want. On just purely the mechanical side, it's as easy as writing a check or going all in, either virtually or in person. And there's room and need for that entire spectrum. And so this makes it possible for me or for you to do things you otherwise might not even be able to imagine doing with a relatively modest investment of time and money. And it's your choice whether there's greater investment on the time side or the money side. It all contributes to a really exciting whole. Mm-hmm.
Ben, do you have anything to say about the TRC involvement, donating to it, what it is?
I'd add two things to what John just named, and just emphasize first that it's really easy. Make a commitment, and then when the process is complete and the council has decided how to allocate the pool of funding that exists, you get told, okay, write your check to this organization or these two. So it's pretty simple to do at that level. And there's an invitation to become much more intimately involved in the review process and the nominations process if you want to be, but it's not required. The two things I would add are that it really is working in terms of the quality, I think, of the proposals that are being surfaced through tapping the collective wisdom of the people doing this work to build new systems for energy, food, water, governance, policy making, all these different dimensions of sort of the whole systems transformation that we need to make, that's focused on the community level as the locus of where we really need to regain our control of our lives and shift the way that our economy works. So it's very impressive to look at the kinds of things that are being funded and to see the synergies between them, the amount of collaboration that's actually being generated by the fact that the process itself is sharing power in this way, is also really an impressive thing and something that we need more and more of that, right? That we need lots and lots of small initiatives trying lots of different things. And yes, scaling up is a good thing, but also scaling across and just knitting together the work of these different groups, I think ultimately may be much more powerful, because there are so many different things that are needed to create this fundamental shift. And it's not going to be a magic bullet. So you are seeding a very experimental and leading edge field of work if you're supporting this the initiatives in this project.
Thank you very much. Ben, you had a story you were itching to tell earlier. Do you care to share?
I have told it, but yeah. So what happened, the way that we first connected is that there was, before we did the co-project, the TRC funding circle, a threshold, would still ask for recommendations from the Collaboratory members, and so Post Carbon Institute put one in the hopper, and I put one in as sort of an independent facilitator of dialogue and inquiry processes in service to the movement, and we wound up then the funding circle said, you know what, why don't you merge those two together, and why don't you work with the New Economy Coalition? We're also going to fund the facilitation of their annual meeting. They've just become a coalition. They're just forming a new board. There's going to be a whole process. It's a day-long thing. We're giving them a grant for that. But maybe you can also partner with them on this inquiry process that you're going to do. And so that's what happened. And we did, I don't know, a dozen or more interviews. You can still read the transcript of the one we did with John, where he talks about grassroots grant making and sort of planted that seed I referred to earlier. A number of fascinating, other fascinating people. I still remember lots of the content from it, and it got me personally. It was very important because it got me to that conference, the Common Bound conference in 2014. That was the first one. The third of these is now about to happen in St. Louis in June, and it's just been a very, very rich experience to get more connected with the New Economy Coalition. They're now also active members of the Collaboratory. So there's just all kinds of interweaving and interpenetrating. And the paper with the Post Carbon Institute, we wound up publishing a short piece called "Weaving the Thriving Resilient Communities and New Economy Movement," and really, it still stands up today, I think, as an interesting set of perspectives on what those terms mean, how they fit into a larger set of movements, what the challenges are, the opportunities, where the growth edges are in all of that. So John was a core part of that initial process, and the whole thing happened through this very dynamic, fluid, complicated, messy set of processes that we created by partnering with Threshold and then having this collaboratory space where all these different organizational leaders are in community together, sometimes in person, sometimes virtually. It's just been I think that little story sort of captures the essence of everything that we're trying to do, and all the different ways that it creates value at both personal level and out in the field and for the movement.
Right, and I would say that story is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. There's probably 100 stories like that, where each individual or organization that's represented in the process has sparked something as big and valuable coming out of it. And I had another thought, just sort of thinking about, we said, oh, this has been going on for 4 years. I would say we're still just getting started. And this is a very exciting time to come on board, because you can avoid a little bit of the earliest stage mess and still have a big role to play in shaping the future and helping to reap or catalyze the rewards that come from it, both for you, your organization, your family, your philanthropy, but also for the movement that we are nurturing.
Well, thank you both for your time. I hope the people who are viewing this video come away from it far more informed, understanding that there's ways of doing philanthropy and connecting that really brings people together and shares power. And there are these fantastic organizations, of which TRCC is certainly one of them. And I thank you for sharing. It's not the only one, thank goodness, in what sounds like a trend, a very positive trend in reshaping not just philanthropy, society, coming together, making changes. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Rich.